Welcome back, everyone, to ME24 Middle East Breakdown, the podcast that dives deep into region's most complex and urgent stories. I'm Hevi Buzo, co-founder and co-editor of Middle East 24, and with me is my co-founder and co-editor of Middle East 24, Dan Pfifferman. Today, we're going to be tackling the possibility of a security agreement between Israel and Syria, a potential development with huge implications for the region, and I believe beyond the region. Before we dive into this, of course, don't forget to follow us on social media. We are on X, Instagram, and YouTube. And please subscribe to ME24 Middle East Breakdown on iTunes, Spotify, or any podcast app that you may use. And don't miss an episode. I wanted to welcome all of our guests, and then
thank you, Hevi. Really good to see you. Good to see all our guests here. We have three fantastic guests that I've had the pleasure of getting to know or follow or read over the years and their expertise on Middle East affairs. We're glad to have with us David Schenker, former Assistant Secretary of State in the U.S. State Department for Near East Affairs, and the Director of the Program on Arab Politics at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. We have with us Shadi Martini, who's the CEO of the Multifaith Alliance for Syrian Refugees, and someone who has spent a lot of time on the ground and working behind the scenes, in front of the scenes, setting the scenes on everything to do with Syria and its kind of return to a regional global stage, and Dr. Eran Lerman, who is the Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, a former Deputy National Security Advisor in Israel, and who held senior positions in Israeli intelligence. Very glad to have the three of you with us today, each bringing your expertise on what has the potential to be really the surprise. I think if we were to go back just a year ago, and if someone would have told me we'd be sitting around and talking about the potential for a security arrangement between Israel and Syria, I would have said you're absolutely crazy. Even a few months ago during Trump's visit to Riyadh, there was talk about Syria joining the Abraham Accords, and I thought I was delusional and asking people to pinch me. That's a whole different story. You shouldn't ask people to pinch yourself in public. But before we jump into that, let's kind of, we had a lot of interesting and breaking news. We're recording this on September 30th, and the day after Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel visited the White House, and there were some interesting developments on the Gaza war front. So maybe we'll take a round just real quickly before we dive into Syria and get your short reactions on what took place yesterday, what can be expected. And David, you living in Washington, working in Washington, maybe we'll start with you and we'll get kind of a different take on what we heard yesterday and maybe what we can expect.
Listen, I think it's a remarkable day. Really, this 20-point plan has something in it for everyone, except for perhaps Hamas. It's quite a bitter pill for Hamas to swallow, the idea that they have to admit defeat and put down their weapons. And I think that, while there's really a lot of details to hash out on every one of these points, really the phases of the withdrawal, how you're going to do disarmament, what type of discussions you have to move toward about Palestinian self-determination. I mean, so many places this can go wrong, starting with Hamas not signing on. I think it's a good point of departure. The main takeaway for me really is that you have Arab and Islamic support for this proposal. Not only all the key states in the Gulf and the region backing this, the Arab states, but also Pakistan, Indonesia, and Turkey, and whether these countries can, put the pressure on Hamas and deliver them, that's the $64,000 question.
Why was Syria not mentioned, in your opinion? There's a lot of expectation that yesterday's basically press conference is going to be talking about a potential security agreement between Syria and Israel. What happened?
Allahu alam. I don't know. Whether this is that the agreement wasn't cooked, it's not ready, but this is in the offing. I mean, there will be some sort of security arrangement, whether this is a modification of 74 disengagement, whether it's some sort of other type of arrangement that looks more like the Camp David security annex, different types of the south of Damascus divided into regions. I don't know what that looks like. It's in the offing. I think it's expected sooner rather than later. But frankly, I think they had a full agenda for yesterday. So it didn't surprise me that wasn't part of the rollout yesterday.
Eran, what's your take on what we saw and what we heard yesterday?
First of all, looking behind your back and behind David's back, there are various fantasies. You can return to the days when you could travel from Haifa to Beirut to Damascus. And I don't know what's stranger, the fantasy world of Dune or what we're actually witnessing. I don't know if this was the most important event in the history of civilization, with all due respect to the opening statement of the president, but it was a remarkable event in three respects. First of all, I'll get from the Israeli angle. Of course, on the assumption that Hamas will be coerced into accepting this, Netanyahu has forfeited the backing of his active right wing in order to move forward with this, because if Hamas does not agree, he will still survive the politics of this situation. But if not, he has made a choice, and this is a very significant choice in and of itself.
Indeed, I think I said we wrote in a piece. There's two losers here, and that's Hamas and the Israeli far right.
In many ways. Yes, we saw an apology to Qatar, which not all of us could easily swallow. And we saw the praise heaped upon Erdogan, which I think some of us in this room would find problematic, and on Qatar. But that's, I suppose, in the world we live in, is an acceptable price to pay in order to take these supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood and latch them on to a framework which essentially serves what I call the camp of stability in the Middle East: Israel, Egypt, Jordan, the Abraham Accords signatories, and of course, all of them with an interest in defeating Islamist totalitarianism. And that, I think, is in itself a very significant departure if we can make it work. And one final point, David's already mentioned this, but this is dramatic because it links with other recent developments, which I think were preparatory for this scenario that unfolded in Washington. On one hand, the Pakistani-Saudi Defense Pact, which is highly significant insofar as it brings Pakistan into the region, but on the side of the camp of stability. Of course, Israel and Saudi Arabia do not have formal relations, but they live together in the most dense area of the Middle East, which is under the table. And in this respect, having the Pakistanis come in with all that they bring into the equation is a very interesting development. Of course, Israel will have to very gingerly manage the Indian angle of all of this, but still, it's an important development. And we saw at the General Assembly, President Prabowo of Indonesia, Prabowo Subianto of Indonesia, using
the surprise of the UNGA, right?
And to say shalom and indicating I believe, a pre-cooked prequel to the Washington rollout. And so Israeli-Indonesian relations have a bilateral angle insofar as the Indonesians need Israeli support to join the OECD, which is done which requires unanimous support. And Israel is in, and Indonesia is knocking on the door. But beyond that, I think there's much more to it. The dominant political force in Indonesia, the Nahdlatul Ulama, NU, is very moderate on questions of
Yes.
Israel. I've heard their
Moderate
leaders,
on
one of their,
general Islamic questions in general.
I
yes,
mean, it
moderate,
doesn't.
anti-Islamist,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that. And I've met one of their leaders in Israel. I've heard in my days with American Jewish Committee, I've heard President Wahid speak in a very blunt manner against the Islamist totalitarians, the violent elements that claim to speak for Islam. And this is the largest Muslim nation on earth. So all of this goes into indeed making yesterday's rollout a very significant event, even if, sadly, it is not yet sure that it will produce the ultimate result, namely an end to the war and the release of the hostages. This is in the hands of what's left of the Hamas leadership, and these are not easy people to deal with.
In terms of Qatar, also like their role now that there was like these kind of comments yesterday by both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu about Qatar, and they still have the leadership of Hamas to see if they actually can, utilize that leverage that they have to actually make a significant push, because so far we haven't seen that they were able to, pressure Hamas to release all the hostages. But I kind of want to, since, we were initially our conversation is about the potential security agreement between Israel and Syria. But Shadi, you've also done some work, I think, on behalf of the Multifaith Alliance, right, in Gaza. So what do you think of this, and how realistic is it, in your opinion, that this would actually happen? Before we go back into kind of talk about the situation and the continuous, I think, conversation about an agreement between Israel and Syria. What do you think of what happened?
And Shadi, actually, let me throw in another question to you while you're going to talk. I'm curious if you have insights into what the new Syrian government is thinking about the potential development between Israel and Hamas.
Well, thank you, Harry and Dan, for this invitation and opportunity. So yes, we are very much working on the ground on Gaza, being for more than a year now, and we're one of the 8 organizations that are currently registered in Israel and work on the ground in Gaza. So that gives me some time of perspective of how Hamas adopts with the changing situation on the ground. Now, on the first hand, I look at this agreement or announcement of an agreement that needs to approval of different sides. So the brilliance, I think, with President Trump is what he did is he gave everyone some kind of win. Even the main two countries like Qatar and Turkey got a PR win in a way. But I think in other, even Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu got a win, because we saw we were talking about direct communication between the Prime Minister of Israel and the Emir of Qatar, which is also something new that we've heard. But in my opinion, in the technical terms, I think Israel got a huge win out of this agreement, and I think if it's implemented, it would technically get rid of Hamas. Now, on the practical level, on the ground level, I'm wondering how Hamas is going to respond. I'm seeing that Hamas is more sophisticated and can agree to the agreement, but at the same time, try to undermine it at each and every step during the implementation phase. And this is what I've seen all along with their agreements before, ceasefires and everything. So that will be the interesting dynamic, how it's going to be handled. And a very interesting dynamic also is going to be who's the Palestinian alternative to Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Even though there is this tendency of bringing Arab and Muslim troops and everything, but at the end of the day, if you're a local, you would know that all these forces are going to leave, and you're going to be left as a Palestinian community to deal with your security issues. So who's going to be this partner, and is it acceptable to the population? And this is what in my opinion, Hamas is banking on, because if it's an alternative that is not good in managing and administering Gaza, it will find its way in again. And that's something that need to be taken in consideration. I think a lot of people are thinking about it. Now,
Well,
in regards,
you actually have two challenges here. You have to have one that's acceptable to the people of Gaza, and you have to have a force that's acceptable to Israel to be able
exactly.
to withdraw its security forces and relinquish it to someone else.
Exactly, and that's the very tricky question that need to be asked and addressed. Now, in terms of the Syrian Authority, I think most Arab countries, including the Syrian authorities, are very happy if there is a deal in Gaza because that relieves pressure on them. Because Syrian government understand that it needs to have a deal with Israel for multiple reasons that we're going to discuss later. But for them is a very welcome announcement because if they make a deal, it wouldn't be not that unpopular in the Syrian street or in Arab street in general, because there won't be a war in Gaza and things would be improving in the humanitarian way and in other aspects in Gaza. So I think Damascus will probably welcome such a development.
David, let's go and talk about what basically is the U.S. hoping for in the security agreement that is still underway. There's a potential for this to happen. What, in your opinion, basically the United States is hoping to achieve, the Trump administration, in this agreement between Israel and Syria? And of course, U.S. diplomacy is like taking a lead in this. It's very important. The role is essential of the United States. But in your opinion, what is it that the U.S. is really hoping to achieve in this? What about other players like Turkey, for example, and their role that might not be, or they might not be hoping for this to happen? And we can talk more about other elements as well that could not want this to work out.
Listen, I think the Trump administration is highly invested in the success of Ahmed al-Shara and a new Syria emerging that is a point of stability rather than instability in the region. He's, as we know, really into, peace deals. All right. But, and he touts this all the time. He talks about 6 or 7 agreements so far, whether this is the de-escalations in Pakistan and India or elsewhere, the things that Masad Boulos has done that may or may not have lasted, really wants the Nobel Peace Prize. But he understands, I think most fundamentally, that for Syria to succeed, and it's not a foregone conclusion that it will, that you need in Syria an economy, you need investment, and you need all the components, all the different communities, but to buy in to the project. And so Trump has been contributing in terms of lifting as quickly as possible all the U.S. sanctions, pressing Congress to lift the Caesar sanctions. So this is, in terms of Syria's success, this is number one. Second, if you get a deal,
can you go back to David? Can you go back to the lifting of the sanctions? I mean, is that rushed? First of all, can you give a literally 20 seconds just to our audience what these sanctions were and from what time period they go back to, just so people understand from where these sanctions are coming from? And then, do you think it's rushed? Do you think this is too fast? In the kind of dating game, the triple dating game that we have here between Israel, Syria, and the U.S. here, are things moving too fast, too slow, and where does this fit in?
Right?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm sorry, Katie.
They haven't been lifted yet, right? The sanctions.
No, not Caesar, not Caesar. Syria, as many of you know, was an inaugural member of the State Department State Sponsors of Terrorism list, and that's 1979. Syria is a regional sponsor of terrorism, provides sanctuary to any number of groups, etc. And so there were these sanctions that were in place. There were other sanctions on human rights. There was the Syria Accountability Act, sanctions for destabilizing Lebanon that were added in, after the flooding Iraq with jihadis to kill Americans during the war. Then after the Cedar Revolution in Lebanon, more sanctions against the government of Syria. So very long list, and culminating with the Caesar Act, which was congressional sanctions. A lot of the other ones were administration, executive branch sanctions. to basically punish the Assad regime and to get them to change their behavior on human rights, gross human rights abuses. So there's these entire raft of sanctions, and many of them, the executive actions, have been lifted by Trump. He had authority to suspend many of these sanctions, but you also have the Caesar Act sanctions, which are pretty comprehensive, that really discourage foreign investment doing business in Syria. And, for a country that until recently is, now you may have 10 hours of electricity in Damascus a day, but at 2 hours a day, no economy to speak of, high levels of urbanization, it makes for a combustible environment. And so what Trump and the administration have done is really move ahead very quickly to suspend or lift these other sanctions, now pressing Congress to lift the Caesar Act, because Trump can't do that. Whether this is premature, listen, I'll leave that to the experts. My own humble opinion is that these are leverage. They're leverage to encourage better behavior, encourage tolerance, human rights, a long list of behaviors that this new government does not seem to be engaging in. But whether it's enough time, the administration put into place 5 sort of demands on the Ashara government, and none of them has been really fulfilled yet. And so
what are the demands?
One of them was I think goodness, somebody help me out here. I had all these things memorized. They were
the gist of them, if you recall.
Yeah, we can
come back to
about minorities, their human rights. It was
exactly. So there are those
working with the United States and fighting terrorism. A broad list of things. Relations with Israel, etc. And some of these things are being worked on. Some of them, certainly the government of Syria is working with the United States on fighting ISIS. But whether you want to push them ahead on these other, unfulfilled sort of, there was a preliminary list, I believe, of like 8 of these, demands that the administration put in place. And if you don't have the leverage, then, it's not traditionally how we've done business. On the other hand, none of these will get done if, there's no economy and there's public dissatisfaction.
Shadi, I want to ask you here, from Syria's point of view, and of course you've, if I recall, you've been on the ground in Syria enough time since the new regime has taken over. First of all, what does Syria look like? I mean, for our viewers / listeners here post Assad, what is day-to-day life like? But more, I guess, kind of getting to this is what is the Syrian government, what is Ashara looking for in these talks with Israel? Is Israel a main goal, or is it the side product of getting rid of sanctions, improving relations with the United States, getting Saudi and Gulf investors or maybe other investors to come in? And I think the big question that I'll leave you with, and I also want Eran to touch on when we go to him next, is is al-Shara and this regime a leopard that has changed their spots, or is this as many people are claiming, a jihadist in a suit with a Philippe Patek watch? So maybe kind of put all that together.
He's got a good taste in watch, I can tell you.
He does have a good taste in watch. It's an $80,000 watch.
Was it something from the former regime, or it's a new taste? But it's a good taste.
Maybe Bashar left something in the palace when he ran off to Moscow.
Very expensive. Yeah, but so I went into, I left Syria originally in mid-2012. And I went to northern part where there was no regime, and I also went to the southern part when it was the Good Neighbor project that provided aid from the Golan Heights into southern Syria. So, and these 2 areas I went even before that. But after the fall of the regime of the Assad government. I went in December, early December, crisscrossed throughout to Syria from the south to the north, to the Turkish border, to the camps and everywhere. And I also went back in early summer to stay about a month and a half. I also was there during the attack on Iran and the exchange of rockets and drones from Iraq. So during very
So you got all the action.
Yeah, I got all the action. It was interesting to seeing these drones and rockets flying over Damascus. And so what I saw in Syria in December, what astonished me is that Assad didn't do any changes, like didn't improve anything. Like the Syria I remember in 2012 is the same Syria I saw in 2025. And the only and
Same or worse? A lot of people say it's worse.
oh, it's worse. Yes, it's the same in types of buildings, but all these buildings are older, like dustier. But there was no new building, no new infrastructure. I didn't see anything new. Like I would expect it to lose my way. Like it's been like 13 years that I've been to these areas, but they stayed the same. Nothing has changed. So that was an astonishment, and we started joking. Like, did Assad know that he's going to leave? So this is why he didn't want to invest anything in this areas, like he foreseen his future. But that was an astonishing thing, and the reaction of the people, even under Assad, they were so depressed and said they just needed any change, any kind of change, because they were saying their situation worsened and worsened as time went ahead. So whoever came and got rid of Assad, they were good with it. Now, that was in December. When I went back in the summer and I stayed for a longer time, I've seen some changes, and depending on the province you have in Syria, but also I seen a change of attitude, especially if you go to the major industrial hubs. Like I'm from Aleppo, so I've had a lot of communication with the industrial elite in Aleppo. They weren't very satisfied of what's going on. They were used to a system for 50 years, and all of a sudden there's a new system. They don't know how it's run, who they're going to deal with. So there was a lot of confusion and frustration. And of course, I sent that also in Damascus. Other areas were very happy. Syria is a mix. So there is reasons that are sectarian. There are reasons that are ethnic. So many other reasons. So if you ask a person, there is only one reason if they're happy or unhappy with the current government. Of course, the government had a lot of challenges, and I also happened to during that trip to meet with President Shara with two colleagues of mine. It was interesting that I'm Muslim and there was a Christian and a Jew with them. So it's like a Muslim, Christian, and a Jew went into the presidential palace in Syria. So that was interesting.
Met a former jihadist. Yeah, I know that joke. It's an old
Yeah,
one.
that's reality. What happened to us?
Yeah.
And it was an interesting dynamic because a part of it we were like Americans that were on talk about the United States and the connections with the United States, but the topic of Israel kept like being discussed more and more. Like it was most of the discussion was really about Israel. So you tend to see and understand that there is a lot of attention in the Syrian leadership toward the situation with Israel. And I was involved.
Can we ask what they were asking? I mean, I don't know how much you can divulge from that meeting.
It wasn't more of asking, it's more like I sensed that it was a type of getting messages out through us. Like one of the things that stuck with me, and I actually, when I went to Israel and spoke in the Knesset about the potential peace with Israel, and I mentioned it and got a huge interest in the Israeli media and public. And it was like what President Shara told us, that in 100 years, there's such an opportunity can happen in the Middle East, and this is one of them. And he was referring to Israel, but this window cannot last forever. We need to take advantage of this opportunity. And what I would understood from the context that he was referring that events might prevent us from doing what we could be able to do right now because of the unique situation that developed after the fall of the Assad regime. So
yes. Do you have one more point you want to conclude with? Because we definitely want
No,
to.
no, I was just referring to the questions that Dan was saying, and I was just wanted to conclude about is
Yeah.
he hiding his true intentions? Everyone asks me this thing, and I
It's the
always
million
say
dollar question.
million
We've
dollar
had
question,
we've
but
had inflation, David. It's no longer
yeah,
the 64,000. It's now the million dollar question.
it's really look, it's people countries have borders because and have agreements because they don't trust each other. It's not like because they trust each other. So I understand there's a lack of trust, but there is a unique opportunity and a need in Syria, and I think Israel needs to take advantage of, because it might be not in their very interest right now. Israel is very powerful, but in the long term, I think it's a very much in the interest of Israel and the national security of Israel to have a deal, not only a security deal back to 1974, but something much bigger and something maybe similar to Egypt or Jordan or maybe the Abrahamic Accords.
I want to say that like I am one of the people who probably, have that same kind of hope of that there is a potential that there could be a change, that there could be something good that could come out of this. We could be on the verge of a change, but we do have a lot of reasons to not be trusting at this point, specifically after what happened in Sweden. So we can dive into that in a little bit, but I wanted actually to ask Dr. Lerman about Israel's perspective. What are the issues and the conditions that Israel would like to see and would require to make an agreement with Syria about security? We know that there are the Iranian-backed elements in Syria that is still present, but in your opinion, what are those conditions and guarantees that Israel wants in order to have a security agreement with Syria?
Well, first of all, you've put your finger on the most important element, which is that in the order of priorities for Israel and for the Trump administration, as well as for the new government in Syria, given what's been happening over the last few months, the most important aspect is the Iranian angle, Iranian subversion, the indirect impact of what will happen in Syria on the situation in Lebanon, the choking off, which we see happening to our satisfaction, of the land bridge that Iran tried to build to the Mediterranean. This is the first priority, because Iran is still, and we saw this very clearly, also in conjunction with the Gaza, the gathering in Washington over Gaza. The one issue that was mentioned in passing, in addition to Gaza itself, was the need to bring about the necessary change in Iran, where things could lead, given the snapback, given the uncertainty over the nuclear issue, given the uncertainty about the future of the regime. All of this is the deepest background element in the Israeli-Syrian partnership, because the new regime in Syria consists of a gathering of people, some of them former jihadists, some of them liberals, some of them Sunnis with a broken heart, who look at what Iran did for years in support of the Assad regime, and they see basically an enemy, as does Israel. So I would say that the first pillar of this interaction rests upon this commonality of perspectives as to what Iran and Iran's proxies have done. At the same time, there's also, I'm not talking now about distrust personally of Shara, but there are huge questions as to the future stability of the Syrian system. Israel took very extensive measures, some of them quite brutal, and sometimes I'm not very happy with the style of pronunciamientos coming from some of the elements of our leadership. about what we're doing. But at the end of the day, there was a need, perceived need, to reduce the residual military capabilities that were bequeathed to the new regime by the Assad regime, so that whatever happens in Syria, and there's a high level of unpredictability and uncertainty, whatever happens in Syria, we would have a significant buffer zone, and we would have taken out and reduced significant capabilities that could have been brought against us in some future scenario.
Was that smart? Did you think that was a smart idea?
Well, at the end of the day, there was very little choice because the level of uncertainty as of last December onwards was extremely high. It can now be managed, I think, better, and this is the essence of turning the campaign of military operations into a lever for negotiations. But the level of what we didn't know about what could happen in Syria, looking back at December, January, the early months of 25, and given that all of this is happening before we went against Iran, and we could not entirely predict the full consequences of the decisions we have already taken late in 24 vis-a-vis Iran. Amidst this level of uncertainties, I think you can justify the ongoing effort to reduce potential capabilities before you actually settle down to negotiate an arrangement. Two more elements are at play, and this is two or three elements are at play, and they make the game even more complicated. One, as Javi said, is the Druze, and that's specific to that community. We have a large, and I say these are two separate points, we have a larger interest in a decentralized Syria, in a Syria where the Sunni majority does not stomp all over the range of relevant minorities, even the Alawites, for all that they have done. But certainly our friends, I'm saying this personally without hesitation, I think I'm known to be a friend of Rojava, and I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of that. And I think the Kurds in the north have rendered the world, not just us in the region, but the world, a great service when they stood up to Daesh at Kobani and stemmed the tide when it looked for a moment as if it would sweep away larger and larger parts of the region. And I think this debt needs to be repaid at this moment of testing. For the Druze, we have an even deeper affinity because the Druze in Israel have shed their blood with Israel from 1948 onwards. And I've recently visited their, what they call it, their operational center, monitoring events in Sweden.
And this is something, Eran, this is something I think a lot of people in the world don't understand, why Israel was getting involved in the fighting between Sunni militias and the Druze in Soweto. And a lot of people really don't understand that the Druze make up such a significant part of Israeli society, and that there was a lot of pressure from within the Israeli Druze community, but also from the vast majority of Israelis who view the Druze really as brothers in arms, like you said, since 1948.
And particularly at the time of war, 2 years in which many young Druze men fell in the line of duty, shoulder to shoulder with other Israelis. And so that was a sense of obligation. There's also a strategic dimension to it. When you stand by your friends, by those to whom you are committed, you generate a different perspective than when you abandon them to their fate. And I would give that advice also very carefully, also to the American administration. And here I come to the last point, which complicates matters even further. as to what are we trying to achieve in Syria. And I think one of the things is we're trying to leverage Israeli capabilities so as to prevent a Turkish takeover, a neo-Ottoman expansion of Erdogan's ambitions.
So essentially,
that
we don't replace Tehran with Ankara, is what you're saying.
Quite so, and here there's an interesting angle, because obviously for those long years in which the northwestern segment of Syria hung on to dear life against Assad with Turkish support, I can understand that President his nom après la guerre, Ahmed al-Shara, Jolani, is obligated to the Ankara, the government in Ankara, to Erdogan in person. Moreover, I would say, frankly, there's a complicating factor, because the present American administration and certain individuals in key positions are very sympathetic, not only towards Erdogan as a person, but also towards the neo-Ottoman perspective in Syria. So that's a problem. And we need to leverage our position in Syria in these negotiations, which makes them very complicated, so as to encourage the new government in Damascus to act in the best interests of Syria, not to become once again an Ottoman velayet.
Dan, can I ask?
Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
I absolutely agree. Some of these points, that the U.S. had raised and come back to me. One of them is, foreign fighters as a prerequisite to lift sanctions, that they'd have to keep them out of the military, that they'd have to, get rid of their ability to construct chemical weapons, that they have to, not allow the territory to be used as the Iranian proxy base any longer. But Iran talked about the connection with the Druze as a reason for Israeli intervention. Soweto, I just listen. I do not doubt the connection, but I'm wondering why they only found this connection now. I mean, the Druze in Soweto have been attacked by the Assad regime since 2011, and the Israeli government didn't choose to intervene for 14, how many years? Like right. 13, 14 years. Well, why now? I mean, some people looking at this from the outside would say it's a little cynical.
I remember back in the days when Hadar was actually a major hub for Hezbollah on the border with Israel, and Israel was dealing with other groups who are opposition, including al-Nusra, and treating their wounded. So I'm perplexed by this change of attitude, and how what David mentions also. Syrians look at the history of the conflict, 14-year conflict of Syria. There was 1 million Sunnis who were killed, mostly Sunnis, not only, but mostly. 14 millions mainly from the Sunni towns and villages and all of this displaced, and no one cared that much to do a military intervention.
And I'm going to go back because I want to kind of ask both of you, David and Shadi, about some of the comments that Dr. Lerman mentioned in terms of Syria, but because I actually want to maybe try to answer that question. I think what changed is October 7th. And I think it's really important that when we talk about what's happening, is that the Assad regime committed massive atrocities, and we know that they targeted mainly the Sunnis. And they did violate, of course, the rights of minorities that were present, but they didn't go and attack minorities as a strategy to not be accused of targeting minorities. They started to be nice to the Kurds. They
targeted the majority.
So exactly, that's true, which is horrific.
Well, the majority now rules in Syria, so need to convince them.
Exactly. So the thing is that I think October 7th changed Israel's calculations completely, and it was like you said, Shadi, Israel was kind of, targeting the weapons of Hezbollah and the Iranian-backed militias, but not really willing to go in and do more before October 7th. But everything changed after October 7th. But I actually
I agree about October 7th in terms of security for Israel. In this context about the security agreement, hitting the assets, taking the Mount Hermon. This I understand the mentality of after October 7th. But I don't what I don't get from the Israeli perspective is taking these small towns in Qnaytara, because I work there. I know they have no significance in the grand scheme of things. Why are they doing that? And what's happening? And October 7th doesn't justify what's happening. Even though, look, I totally sympathize with the people of Sweden. I think there's huge atrocity that happened towards them. I don't condone anything like that. But what we're talking about is the context of the security agreement between the State of Israel and the Syrian Republic. So how is October 7th?
I'm gonna build up the crescendo before Iran jumps in, because I see he's itching to jump into this. But I'll politely disagree with you, Hevi. I don't think it was October 7th. Maybe from a Druze perspective, it was, right? The need to go in and help the Druze who were feeling that it was their October 7th. I think, Shadi and David, my sense is Israel was very hesitant to ignite a broader war against the northern front that would draw in Hezbollah, that we thought was going to be a much more serious opponent, that the Iranian component would join in. And I think, there was no love lost also for the Sunnis in Syria because of the elements of the many jihadist, Al-Qaeda jihadist, ISIS elements that were in there. And so that said, Israel did go in and do the Good Neighbor Project and rescued and gave medical aid to thousands, if I'm not mistaken, if not more, of Syrians, including elements who were fighting against the regime on the border. And so I wouldn't say Israel sat by. I think the Good Neighbor element was strong, but there was a mutual deterrence factor to not get sucked into a war that had nothing to do with Israel. For the first time, there's a war in the Middle East, right? That has nothing to do with Israel. There's actually more, but I say that cynically. And I think the potential escalation with Hezbollah, with the Assad regime itself, and then of course with the Iranians. And so what changed wasn't October 7th. I think what changed was the fall of Assad. Iran, what's your take on this?
First of all, it's a fair point that David raised. Why didn't we intervene earlier? Or why didn't we actually move against the Assad regime in our day? And I know that there were Israelis who thought we should do it. I think essentially the sense at the time was basically just the old China shop warning. If we break it, we own it. And the last thing we could and want, or even we wanted or even could do over the last years of conflict across the border was to own up the wreckage of Syria. As for the Druze position, it was quite ambiguous until recently. There were Druze who supported the regime wholeheartedly because the alternative was Sunni rule. And there were others who did come under attack. I think the shift, the attitude change in Israel on the 7th of October, that's true. And Shadi, I agree that not every point we took beyond the 74 demarcation line is of strategic importance, but the connection between them creates a buffer zone that at the time seemed necessary. By now, it's increasingly becoming, I would say, a negotiating card to see how things work out. Now, on the Druze, let me say something of significance. The attitude of the Druze in the Golan Heights itself has changed over the years. It didn't begin with the 7th of October. It began well before that. But it became, I think it was consolidated after the football rocket tragedy, in which 12 Druze children were killed. I want to remind all of us, this was the point in which Israel escalated its war on Hezbollah.
Right.
For a long year, we tolerated a low to mid-intensity war with Hezbollah from Lebanon. This is when we went in and killed the military commander in his home in Beirut, which is something we generally try to avoid doing until then. And the escalation came quickly after that, leading to the beepers, Hassan Nasrallah, and all that followed. And I think the Druze in the Golan, as well as in Israel, appreciate the fact that Israel reacted to the death of these 12 children as if they were blood of our blood. I've been recently to Majd al-Shams, where there's a monument to these boys and girls who were killed there. And I had a very keen sense of the depth of integration of the Druze society in the Golan today into Israel. So that's an aspect that has evolved over the last few years, was intensified after the 7th of October, particularly intensified after the summer of 24.
Can we actually comment? I want to hear from David and Shadi about something that Dr. Lerman said before we end, about the kind of how is Syria's future is viewed by the United States. Let's start with you, David. In terms of, like, we hear Tom Barak always repeating, about Syria being united. Now, I don't think Israel is basically, even based on what Dr. Lerman is saying, wants a kind of a split Syria that is fragmented, but it does talk about a decentralized Syria, which is a lot of the minorities right now are calling for. And Shadi, I want to hear your perspective on that. You know that the Kurds have been now, asking for this. Decentralization is not separating the country or splitting the country apart, or a federal system. How realistic is that? And is the U.S., when it talks about a united Syria, which I even think that it's in everybody's interest, including Israel, that there is a central government in Syria, but how would it look like, and how is the U.S., kind of viewing the realistic aspect of the realities on the ground today, specifically after what happened to the Alawites, to the Druze, and of course all the fears of the Kurds, especially given that there are the Turkish-backed elements in northern western part of Syria. And I want to hear Shadi's perspective on that as well.
All right, me first?
Yes.
Please.
Listen, I don't think, what is it, like Adam Merkazia, right? The decentralization. I don't think that word is in Ahmed al-Shar's vocabulary. I think when he thinks of that word, he thinks of a fragmented, weak state with the periphery breaking off or not having any type of cohesion with the center. I don't think that's, his vision of Syria. And nor do I think the Trump administration is interested in promoting a certain type of vision of Syria. This administration does not want to be involved in the domestic politics of Arab countries. You heard Trump in Saudi Arabia. Well, we're not into state building. That's not us. Right? We want Syria to succeed. We will help it to succeed economically. We will help it to get along with its neighbors by promoting peace agreements or normalizations or the de-escalation agreements. This is not something this administration, I think, is going to be invested in, even though, from where I sit, this is what this country needs, because obviously none of the components trust the center after what they saw either in Soweto or what's going to happen with the SDF. Why would they put down their weapons to be at the mercy of a government? And Shara might have the best intentions, but he has to cater to the foreign fighters who brought him to power. And so at the end of the day, I think all the minorities are really hesitant to submit to a strong central Damascus that they don't trust. So, but I don't think that's good. That's not going to be in this administration doesn't have a dog in that fight. I don't believe.
Shadi, and
Mhm.
I want to tell you that, like, I want you to tell us from the Syrian perspective, that is like the majority perspective, because I also know that there are a lot of people who are concerned about the jihadi elements that are within Ahmad al-Shara's forces, right? We know this is a reality. We know that there are activists who are,
And the cabinet, not just the forces.
yes, and that they are Arab and Sunnis, and that are also all have their own concerns, and there's voices rising in Damascus and Aleppo. There is something happening now. Also, at the same time, we talked about this yesterday, Shadi, when there were the protests that happened just recently in Damascus. I think this is really important to point out, that we're like talking about support for Gaza and being wearing like kind of signs that like show support for this so-called axis of resistance, and also calling out for the supporting the Houthis, supporting and it all happened on the basically the anniversary of killing Hassan Nasrallah, which was celebrated all over Syria. People were actually angry. The slogans were, there's a lot of anti-Semitic slogans, remember? And then there was the anti-Israel slogans, and also anti-Egypt, anti-UAE. Now they're saying it's all anti-Egypt, and that's why they're upset, but they're actually upset about the whole direction. So there is a movement on the ground. I feel that it's kind of like a split off from this so-called axis of resistance, which is the Iranian-backed element, which is also connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. But what do you think really is happening in that aspect? And what do you think of these calls that are happening for many reasons?
Yeah.
That including what they've done in both the coastal part of Syria and to the Druze in the south.
Yeah, I thank you very much, Avi. This is a very interesting point. And there, look, the Sunni community is the largest community in Syria by far, and it doesn't consolidate behind one opinion. You have so much diversity in this community. You had the city elites, the industrial. You have more farming community. Even religiously, you have a very robust Sufi community that doesn't align with the Salafi mindset. So it's a very diverse, dynamic community that has different interests and different thinking about certain issues. Now, of course, President Shara has his own challenges from his core constituents and also from the other diversity communities around Syria, including minorities. I think that he's well aware of this complexity and is trying to have a delicate balance between the two things. I think Soweto was a very, very bad miscalculation on the government part. Listening to government official before that, they thought somehow they had some kind of an agreement in their mind that between brokered with the U.S. and Israel, and there was like some kind of framework that they were implementing. I think they miscalculated, totally understood totally what the mandate was and was acceptable and was not acceptable. And returning to the diversity, I think decentralization in terms of administrative decentralization is not a minorities request. There's a lot of communities, let's say Aleppo, that needs decentralization in terms of administrative services, because traveling to Damascus every time you need an approval for something saves a lot of time and effort. So there is, but decentralization in terms of like having your own security forces, that's not something that is tolerated by
Shadi, is there talk of some
And
kind
David
of
is shaking his head.
confederacy system?
no
Or what are we talking about here?
federal
David
system.
is
No,
shaking his head, just so maybe David doesn't have something to say about that.
no, I think
No, I
David
agree. I agree. I don't think that's something that's going to happen. I don't
Yeah.
think there's going to be local security forces there.
Yes, that's what's for instance, that's the hurdle with SDF, because they wanted to keep their own component in bulk as a security system that support this, and this is the differences. Will it be part of their larger security forces spread around every area or bulk? So that's one of the major differences. But from the Syrian point of view, the progression towards the view of Israel have progressed, or let's say went down. Like initially, Syrians were very happy of what happened with Hezbollah because they see that what happened had an effect of the overthrow of the regime of Assad. So in a way, most Syrians appreciative of what Israel does, and we
helped Assad regime kill 500,000 Syrians.
exactly, and this is why we saw a lot of people celebrating the killing of Hassan Nasrallah was baklava all over.
Einstein's thanking Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Arabic and
Yeah. So
in
you
English.
went on this high of Syrians very enthusiastic about future relationship because they saw, oh, you did us a favor, we did you a favor. We cut the road to Beirut through Syria. We stopped the narcotics trade, which was generating billions to support all these activities against Israel. But what Syrians were witnessing is a very aggressive Israeli policy toward them after they got their part done of like breaking the axis of evil. So this attitude with the Syrian population started changing, and they were questioning, like, does really Israel wants peace with us, or they're only looking for a security agreement that they can enforce on us because they're taking this land and making them a negotiation chip? And now they're using the Druze tragedy as a negotiation chip, because we're thinking this way. Look, Israel has gone and occupied areas like southern Lebanon, and then it left 20 years, 30 years. We were thinking like, and some Druze are thinking this way. Are long term, will Israel commit? Or do we have to live among the Syrians who surround us? Because there is 80 kilometers between the Israeli borders and Suwaida. So that's the questions that a lot of people are wondering about. Is it a genuine? I understand the local politics and the Druze community's influence in Likud and all of that, but long term, will a new government, not associated with the Likud, change the position of Israel or the support? So a lot of these dynamics are in the mind of Syrians, and they're wondering what's the end game here for the current government and Israel in general.
What would you like to add? Would you like to comment, Dr. Lerman, about this?
I'm not going to be to defend some of the most aggressive aspects of the policy of the present government, quite specifically the Minister of Defense. But having said this, the commitment to the Druze is very widely based across the Israeli spectrum, and in this respect, I think it goes beyond politics. But there's also a full understanding of the complexity of the situation, and this is exactly what the negotiations are aimed at: creating some kind of a security arrangement in southern Syria, which will not require Israel to intervene in favor of the Druze, but would rather secure their position in Suwaida through a mutually acceptable arrangement.
Very good. I think, Javi, if we can do a lightning round to kind of sum this up, because our time is running out. And so I'll ask each of our three panelists. We'll start with David, and then we'll go to Shadi and Eran back around the clock and to wrap that up. So let's see if we can do this quick. And that is from your perspective, right? So we have an American perspective, a Syrian perspective, and an Israeli perspective here. What is a realistic, right? So not a pie in the sky here, but a realistic that you would like to see in the coming month to 6 months. What do you expect to see? And then from, again, an American, a Syrian, and Israeli perspective, what is the one red line that you think can break this whole process from each point of view? And we'll kind of do this lightning round, and we'll conclude.
I don't know. I think it'd be realistic to expect that you will have a Syrian government, the Shara government, that starts to hold Syrians that perpetrated, for example, the coastal incidents or Suwaida massacres accountable. And this is sort of the minimal bar to get Syrians of the different components to try to move toward investing in this new government and to building some trust. I think that's possible, but this gets to the red line here. We're going to have an enduring problem with foreign fighters in Syria, with jihadis who al-Shara is dependent on, rode into Damascus on their backs, and can't just put them out to pasture and farms with their families in Idlib, right? They're going to play a role going forward, and what they do what type of role they play going forward is, in my mind, going to determine the success or failure of al-Bashar in Syria.
Very good. Shadi? Oh, sorry, David, a red line from an American perspective, from this administration specifically.
This is sort of the red line. This administration doesn't care about human rights. I think it's important, but I don't think it's important to this administration. The red line is going to be, and Eran talked about this earlier, this is going to be, there's got to be some sort of buffer or separation between Israel and Turkey and Syria. Israel tried this once in Lebanon, where Israel had the south and Syria had everything north, and that was not a good situation. I don't want to see it working like that. But this is the one thing that I think concerns me about Syria. And a red line, is for the region, for U.S. interests, for Israel. It's, when the rubber hits the road, it's where Israel is on the border with Turkey, or Turkey is on the border with Israel. Even in Syria, that's going to be a problem.
Shadi?
Yeah, well, from my point, I see that a security agreement is very crucial with Israel. Why? Because it starts the de-escalation, and we start a process of moving beyond the security agreement. In my opinion, it's very vital if we can move to a much more bigger deal, a deal that resembles something like done with Egypt or Jordan, or something like the Abrahamic Accord. But it's very vital, in my opinion, to the resolution of the whole issue, even the Palestinian issue in some aspects, to have Syria in one of these camps. And hopefully that will be the first step towards it. But also, I think that the Syrian government have the responsibility to address the situation in Suwaida and other regions, and have some plan to bring the Druze back into the Syrian community and Syrian fold, so they can feel safe and appreciated in their own country. That's a huge task because of what happened after the attack on Suwaida and the atrocities. But that's something that would give huge signals even to the Kurds in Northeast Syria and their future, and how they can be part of the bigger Syrian community. And I think if Israel is worried about the influence of Turkey, I think not pushing and pressuring the current Syrian government too much might be counterproductive to the long-term strategy of pushing in reality into the column of Turkey. Because at the beginning, I didn't see that. Like the visits that Shara went to Saudi Arabia, certain statesmen, certain actions were giving some signals that I'm trying to be independent here. Maybe for his own self-interest. I don't know what he wants to do. Democracy, monarchy, I don't know what type of dictatorship. But at the end of the day, he was trying to put signals that I don't want to be in anyone's camp, but I'm aligning myself with the more moderate Western United States camp. Thank you.
Is there a red line from a Syrian perspective?
I think
yes. A game breaker from a Syrian perspective.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the Syrians have a red lines. They don't want like very vulgar interference in their internal affairs, because it's going to hurt them internally. Like they're already facing
their ability to sell this to their population.
Mounting pressure. And at the end of the day, look, but let's be frank. If you want to have peace with Israel, the only community that can have this burden on its back is the majority, is the Sunni Arab community.
Sure.
That's the only community that can go and offer peace to Israel, and no one can say you're selling Syria. They're 70% plus of the Syrian population. So at the end of the day, you don't want to alienate these people and make them very anti-Israel when they are not at the moment.
And I actually just want to echo, so Shadi, you think that this security agreement, if it does happen, could be the kind of basis for maybe bigger agreements down the road, which is, I think a lot of people hope for that. But I want to hear Dr. Lerman's perspective on this lightning round, and then you're probably going to reiterate it.
3 points very quickly. First of all, I would be very cautious about suggesting an Egyptian-style peace for the simple reason that the Golan situation is very different in many respects than that of Sinai by now, including the American recognition situation and so on and so forth. So, but if we can, I believe that there's a very good prospect for a security agreement that will at least enable Israel to concede much, or I don't know if all, but much of what it took over after December. The key is, as David said, the Israeli-Turkish relationship as it would emerge. I would mention in this respect that we have a friend in common that is playing a very useful role in mediating and alleviating this tension, namely the Azeris, the Azerbaijani government, which has a deep bond of friendship with Israel and with Ankara simultaneously, and they've already been of help. But ultimately, a lot will depend on whether our Saudi friends and the Emiratis and those who played such an important role yesterday in Washington will also move in to help the new Syria gain its economic footing. Because if there's one thing you can say about the Assad regime, it's not just that it didn't build the country, it nearly burned it to the ground. The green and the dry, with the dry, and as they say in Arabic, and a lot has to be done. And of course, with the drug trade taken out, there needs to be a future for the Syrian economy, and only the Saudis and the Emiratis can really come in. And they will not, I believe, do so on behalf of the Turkish interests. So all of this tells you something about what's really important in terms of what will flow from an Israeli-Syrian security agreement.
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of ended on that note, because I was going to bring up the Gulf aspect here. And I think, if I'm looking at what's happening in Washington, especially from the Trump administration, that's big ideas connecting different dots in these kind of grand bargains, these grand packages, and leveraging economics and politics and kind of building these broad coalitions to solve complex problems. And so I agree with you that I think we're going to have to see an expanded Saudi UAE role. And from their perspective, and we can explore this in future episodes, from the Gulf perspective, the regional security and economics are absolutely tied together. And I think they understand that very clearly in regards to the Abraham Accords in general. And that's why the talk prior to what happened in Sweden was bringing Syria, the new Syrian government, into the fold of the Abraham Accords and tying their security, cooperation, and ultimately some kind of Abraham Accords to Israel with their economic reconstruction. And I think, Hevi, we'll have to explore that in future episodes.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all for this really enriching conversation. Definitely encourage everybody who is watching and listening to follow us, Middle East 24, ME24 on social media, X, Instagram, and YouTube. We're also now our podcast. ME24 Middle East Breakdown is on iTunes, Spotify. We're on YouTube as well, but also all other podcast apps. And thank you so much, David Schenker, Dr. Eran Lerman, and of course, Shadi Martini, for being with us. And stay tuned for a lot more episodes to come where we break down this untold aspect about the developments in the Middle East.